Hello YouTube and welcome. I think like everyone else I've been quite excited for the release of Battlefield 2042, and I'd seen a lot of memes going around about the penguins in the trailer, and that sparked off the idea for this piece. So let's dive in and take a look at how I did it. So in the background here you can see the sketch I did, plus some extra elements that are photographic. Now there really is no point in sketching these first if all you're going to do is ink over them anyway. I always think if a photo will do it, just use the photo. There really is no sense in making extra work for yourself if you really don't need to. The one thing I do tend to do though is either manipulate the photo in some way or change it up so it's not exactly the same as the original. So I'm working in Clip Studio here, which is now my go-to art software of choice. I really like the way it works, and a lot of its tools really work well for me. Here I'm working with a custom brush, doing all this inking, one that I made myself. It's a bit odd at first making brushes in Clip Studio, but once you've done it a few times it's no more complicated than Photoshop really. I've been using some of the stock brushes and they're okay, but they weren't quite giving me the texture I wanted. I think it's worth mentioning here that the whole time that I'm inking over the top of this and putting in a lot of these details you can see here, I'm actually looking across at my second monitor at the reference I have. These lines I'm playing around with here are me starting to block in where the different chunks of colour are going to go. The method I have currently relies on a fill, and if you don't have a line closing up enough gaps, it won't work properly. So those quick lines I was drawing there were just to get a nice texture between the chunks of colour. And then once I've done that, I can set the layers, the ink layers with the lines, to be reference layers, and then I can do a paint bucket tool onto a different layer which fills up the holes. It works really well and is really fast compared to the way I used to do it in Illustrator. As you see, he starts out white, and my original thought was to put him in some sort of Arctic camo. I very quickly realised that if I was going to do that, all of his equipment was going to blend in with him, and it was just going to end up being almost a monochrome piece, where the penguin's black and white and all the equipment's pretty much black and white. So I decided to go with the flat dark earth instead. So here I'm just adding all the shade onto a hard light layer. The shade colour I've gone for is quite similar to the turquoisey colour used in all the branding to try and make it fit in nicely. And also it adds to the cold feel to use something that's a cold colour in the shadow shade. I've been using hard light now for a couple of years instead of multiply or overlay as the shadows and the highlights. You can pretty much use hard light for everything. It's really versatile. Here I'm again using a hard light layer, this time to add some bounce or reflected light. Going for the very bright turquoise from the branding this time. Now I'm adding a first layer of highlights to anywhere that would be reflective enough to give a good highlight, and anywhere that's sort of raised and catches the light correctly. This tends to be glossier things. You'll see me later come in with a much harder, higher highlight, as it were. This is for the things I want to be really reflective and shiny. Doing here is adding some shade to his feet and the lower half of his body, just to mimic the way that the head and upper part of the body is usually better lit than the feet. And then I come in with some environmental lighting that tries to mimic the art on the cover, so giving the cool turquoise over to the left and some warmer pinky orangey colours over to the right. It's very subtle, but it helps tie it into the background and the lighting effects that I'm going to add over the top. What you see me doing here is starting to mimic those lighting effects that come over the top, the sort of rays of light, using various techniques here, using rulers to draw them out in the angles, and then different filters to blur and change the saturation over the top of the image. And then it's a case of using this background reference image I found here in various different chunks and at different sizes and different places to get the result I want in the background. Very similar to what I did with the Chris Vector, really, using reference instead of having to hand do it all when you know, if you don't need to and you're short on time, or you know you've got a deadline, why bother? You know, just do it the fastest way possible. And you know, because the way I'm altering the image and I'm using it in the background, it's not really a case of, you know, stealing someone else's photo in that way. Just jumping into Illustrator here to produce the text for the logo. It's something I really wouldn't want to do in any other program, to be honest. Despite some of the shortcomings of the Adobe software, I still wouldn't want to use anything else for this sort of thing. You see me pull in the original logo, and then I start copying out the size of the letters to get the different shapes I need for the new letters. Those of you into typography will know that the verticals are always a bit thicker than the horizontals. So it's not just a case of using a square and dragging it out in the different directions, you actually have to think about it. It's also because I don't have this typeface, and it might even just be a completely custom one, I'm not sure, but I had to reinvent what the other letters would look like, just based on the letters I had. So here you can see me rounding out the corners to the same degree, copying them on the D, and I'm noting down what numbers they are when I do that, so that when I come to do the other letters, I then pull these corners into the same amount to make sure that it's consistent across all the lettering. And then you can see me doing the same thing here to get all the same consistent curves. Now I think, I don't remember if I recorded this, but I did change the P. I decided it was too small and it needed to come down a little bit. This is me just doing some really basic kerning. I probably could have done a nicer job of it, but you know, I wasn't trying to do the world's most perfect kerning, just a bit of changes here and there. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll come in and add all the glitch effect. So it's just a case of cutting the letter in half and then offsetting it. And I think I tried various things on various different letters, and sometimes I thought it worked better than others, so I changed my mind a fair few times. And you can see me using this little red block to speed up the process of offsetting to the same amount. Yeah, I definitely found that it changed the P too much, and I had to go and change something else. And what I'm doing here is just repairing them so that there isn't that line in between. You can sometimes find that if you leave those little lines, what happens is when you bring the vector into another piece of software, that line is kept. Now I had a few different ideas for the text here, and you can see me playing around with them, but in the end I thought it always distracted from the illustration, and that wasn't really what I wanted. So in the end I just copied it out, put a blur on it, and just let that blur very softly distinguish the dark bits from the light bits. The keen-eyed among you will notice the fish in the pouch at this point. I'd shown this to Tysel, and he'd made that suggestion, and I just thought it was a great idea. It added a lot of character and comedy to the piece, and I put it in, but I did it in such a rush I forgot to record it. But here you are, there it is. Hope you liked this and enjoyed it. Please feel free to subscribe and like and all that good stuff, and I'll catch you next time.